Right then. Well, without further ado, um, I'd like to introduce you to Tom Harris. I'm very, very pleased that he's here this evening. Tom spent a lot of time fighting in the vivisection industry, not in the vivisection industry, against the vivisection industry, um, and has an awful lot of experience. And the idea of these meetings and these talks and discussions throughout April is in order to help us try and see if there are other avenues that work, that don't work, things that have been tried in the past, things that may be possible in the future, and to gather as much experience as we can from other people that have that knowledge and have that history and have that input. So, Tom started in the animal rights movement, as far as I'm aware, at around 15, sabbing, much like quite a few of us, and then moved into I forgot what it was now, the Southern Animal Rights Coalition, and they had a few successful things within the vivisection movement. That was one of those was ending experiments on goats, and another one was ending experiments to do with Botox, which I'll allow him to talk about. And then obviously it moved into the SHAC campaign amongst many other things. So with all that said, Tom, would you like to tell everybody a little bit about your background, how you came to be who you are and where you are?
Yes. Hello, everyone. So I've lost my voice a bit this week, but too much shouting. Yeah, so as you say, I've been involved in the animal rights movement since I was about 15 or 16. I went vegetarian when I was 9 after meeting a pig at a petting zoo outside a butcher's shop. I'm sure many of you have heard me talk about that before. If not, that was pretty much it. When I was 16, I think I met a local hunt saboteur who invited me out hunt sabbing, and I did what any self-respecting punk would do, and I went to the local police station and asked them whether it was a good idea for me to go out hunt sabbing. I lived in quite a small town where we knew all the local police officers, and yeah, at the time it seemed a sensible thing to do. He didn't talk me out of it. I think maybe he tried to, but not very well. And so, yeah, I went out hunt sabbing when I was 16, became increasingly involved in various actions and campaigns, including Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty, or SHAC, which was aiming to close down Europe's largest animal testing laboratory. And yeah, as a teenager, I just started out in my small town, putting up stickers, fly posting, and doing various kind of like very low level kind of civil disobedience, direct action type things. And then over time became more involved in the protesting and the organizing, and yeah, it ended up, I suppose, becoming my life. And then I ended up co-founding with my best friend Nikki, the Southern Animal Rights Coalition. As you mentioned, we had a number of successes, a number of campaigns over a 4-year period. We did, we closed down puppy farms, we closed chicken units, battery units. We founded the Lobster Liberation Front and helped to introduce wild boar back into the UK, and a number of things. But in terms of vivisection, as you say, we stopped deep diving experiments on goats, well, all animals by the MOD, but the tests were happening on goats. We started that campaign really kind of how I feel most campaigns, really. If you kind of want a successful campaign, you need to be able to show the public what it is that you're opposed to, and as well as show them what it is that the future looks like, what victory looks like. But in terms of showing them what the problem is, for me, like the best way of doing that has always been to go in and at a minimum get evidence of what's happening, ideally rescue some of the people being exploited and oppressed. So yeah, with the goat campaign, we broke into a military research facility, we liberated 9 goats, and then the next day we launched a pressure campaign to get the rest out and close the laboratory down. And we did a lot of scientific research. We quickly discovered these tests have been ended in most countries across the world, that they were really just a relic from the early 20th century. And And we unfortunately had a supportive member of parliament who raised us in parliament week after week. We were on the streets week after week, protesting tertiary targets, secondary targets, and yeah, eventually won. The MOD scrapped the test. They reviewed them, then they scrapped them, closed the laboratory, and we kept protesting until we'd made sure they handed all of the goats over to a sanctuary. And then the other vivisection campaign we had was cosmetic Botox. Again, that started with a liberation, 2003, I think. Some people went into Wickham Laboratories in Hampshire, rescued 700 mice, and also took a lot of paperwork which showed that they were testing cosmetic Botox, which was, a pretty sketchy grey area of the law when cosmetic testing is meant to be banned, and the LD50 test, which they were using, was meant to be banned. So we helped expose that, and we managed to start a campaign against that, which was ultimately, I think, taken on by, I think Cruelty for International might have taken that on and ended up winning it when we got sent to prison. So so that's a part of me. There's a lot more. I'm sure we'll get to more in a minute. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, that's not helpful, is it? Yeah, that's a great way to start. I mean, there is plenty more to discuss. A very simple question. Explain SHAC, explain the HLS situation and why HLS, why Huntington Life Science of all people.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I will firstly just absolutely plug the shit out of my book, Your Neighbour Kills Puppies. It covers the whole period of the SHAC campaign. There's a lot of inspiration there, so please buy it, steal it, do whatever you want, borrow it. But yeah, please read it because there's a lot of inspiration there. But I think there's often a misconception with the SHAC campaign that we were kind of like, we just picked the biggest, scariest target we could, and we're kind of like, yeah, we're going to bring it down. Like, we can take them, we can take anyone. Actually, the reason that Huntington Life Sciences was selected as the target at that point was because they were low-hanging fruit, because they were the largest laboratory in Europe. But in 1997, there was two simultaneous investigations at their UK facility and their US facility that happened completely by coincidence at exactly the same time. But as a result of this horrific footage of dogs being punched in the face, primates being slit open from the throat to the neck without anesthesia, all kinds of horrific things, and nothing that was, I guess, anything other than a day in the life at a laboratory. But this is the first time most people were seeing this. So, and you actually get to see these animals being used in the same way someone would use a computer in an office, when it's not turning on, when it's not printing their documents, and they just start, slapping it around and whatever. And then that's how these animals are being treated. And yeah, there's nothing that was in this footage, I don't think, that you wouldn't see in any laboratory on any day of the week. But the fact was the public was seeing it. And as a result of that, customers started deserting the laboratory, shareholders started dumping their shares. And so very quickly, their share price began to plummet. And so local campaigners, Huntington Action Group, I believe, and others started, like a local campaign against the facility. They actually put a lot more pressure on the shareholders. There was some protest camps set up outside the facility. And that extra pressure drove their share price down from well over, I think, about £13 down to like 1p or something. It was a ridiculous plummet of their share price. And it was, a combination of the exposure and the public pressure. And the laboratory had just taken out a loan. I think it was £24 million they'd borrowed from the NatWest Bank. And being in such, a sketchy financial situation, once their share price had plummeted, they had no assets. And so they had no real way to pay back this loan. And so when the SHAC campaign started, it wasn't a case that we had to take down this whole laboratory. It was a case that we just had to convince the NatWest Bank to revoke their loan. And then that was it. So we weren't even really taking on HLS. We were actually taking on NatWest initially. And so that's why it was picked. It was, it was off the back of a series of successful campaigns against small breeders. So Consort Kennels, who bred beagles for testing, Hillgrove Cat Farm, and then we had Shamrock Monkey Farm, we had Regal Rabbit Farms, all being shut down by these pressure campaigns. And so, yes, it made sense to go bigger and better, but also hunting life sciences were just there for the taking. Unfortunately, fortunately, within a year, we convinced NatWest to revoke their loan. All the papers, the news was like headline news, like this laboratory is closing tomorrow, like they've won, it's over. And then Lord Sainsbury's, as you say, stepped in and basically one of his friends, a guy called Warren Stevens, or anonymously, he bailed them out with another loan. And for the first and only time in British history, the Bank of England gave banking to a private company. It hadn't happened before. It hasn't happened since. So then at that point, that was 2001. And really, I think that was probably one of the most defining moments in modern history for our movement, because that's when the wheels started to come off. I think there was a rise in militancy. There was an exodus from the movement in certain parts, because people were like, we can't take on the government. Like, we can't take on the government. It's too much. So a lot of people just threw the towel in and left. People went to other campaigns. But it also meant, I think, at that point, because, at that point, 2001, we had, the fur farming ban was just going through. We were like on the doorstep of what we thought would be the fox hunting ban. The circuses felt like they were on their way out. So really the focus, that the easiest big thing we had left was animal testing. And so all the focus of the movement went onto that. And then as it kind of radicalized, we escalated, the government escalated. And I think really that was the beginning of the end of that period of our movement way back in 2001. It took, many years to kind of hit that tipping point where they came down on us. But I think really, if we look at the history of our movement, 2001 and that bailout by the government was, pretty catastrophic for our movement, to be honest.
So bringing you, excuse me, I got your throat suddenly. So bringing it back right at the beginning, you said about applying pressure to shareholders and watching the share prices drop. Do you want to explain a little bit about how that sort of thing was accomplished?
Yeah, so it was actually started before SHAC, and I think I always want to be very careful to give credit where credit's due, and that was the local campaigners as a hunting action group. It was activists in Manchester and Liverpool, actually, I think that started this, and they managed to identify, and again, the full details are in my book, but they managed to identify who the institutional shareholders were of Hunting Life Sciences, so what companies had shares in them, but also the private shareholdings. And as a result of the SHAC campaign, it's now impossible to find out which private individuals hold shares in a company, because the impact it has, if you stand outside someone's house protesting their shareholdings, they very quickly drop them, and that's incredibly effective. Also, as a result of the SHAC campaign, you're now no longer allowed to stand outside someone's house and tell them to drop their shares. So essentially, a company that is floated on a stock exchange, they raise capital through shareholding. So I won't get too technical about it, but basically the value of a company is reflected by how much its shares are. So if you have 1,000 shares, each share is £1, then your company's worth £1,000, basically. If you have 10,000 and they're worth £10, then you have £100,000 worth of company. So if you lower the share price, then you lower the value of the company, and the quicker that drops, the more the share price drops, and then you end up with a company that's basically worth nothing, that no one wants to invest in, and then the company has no way of building more capital, and and it basically just fucks up the whole company to the point that they can't operate. And so that's what we're doing. So there's a lot of home demos against individuals that had shares, and a lot of institutions, and also a lot of media and stuff as well, because the Labour Party, who had promised, it's this new Labour, new life for animals, they had shares in HLS. So obviously, when Anne Widdecombe from the Tory party did a whole op-ed piece about it, and so the Labour Party pension scheme pulled their shares out, and there's other big companies that just didn't want that association. So it was an incredibly effective tactic, and it did cause a lot of problems to the company, and it's something I don't think they really recovered from, because when it was added to all the other things that were happening, they got kicked off every single stock exchange in the world and ended up barely able to buy. They were having to buy and sell their own shares just to maintain a share price illegally.
Became
Yeah,
grey papers or whatever they're called, aren't they? Where it was
yeah, they
like
ended up on the grey
untouchable.
market. Yeah, well, I think they call it the lonely hearts column of the share of the stock industry, because you basically can't find them unless you're looking for them, and even then, it's like, deep diving and very technical and difficult to buy or sell shares. So literally, yeah, they were.
I presume was that was more luck than judgment. The fact that they just opened a loan at the same time, that
I
you
mean,
started to apply pressure to the shareholders.
I mean, for us, it was luck. For them, it was just bad judgment. It was like the guy that was running it at the time the investigations came out, Christopher Cliff. He was, I mean, he was an idiot basically, and like his company, like even before the investigations, his company wasn't doing well, so he just opened a new facility that closed within a year, and then but he'd got the loan to start paying that, and then that tanked. So then he got more money, and then the investigations came, and he ended up getting kicked out of the company and having someone else, an accountant, actually kind of like parachuted in to try and save the company, and that's a big part of actually why it ended up being so hard, because they had a very sketchy team of accountants literally running the company.
So, excuse me, I've definitely got your throat now. Oh, to the point that's just made me forget my train of thought there. Um, so, along with applying pressure to HLS themselves, Huntington Life Sciences, you did a great deal of applying pressure to their clients and their insurers, etc. Secondary protests, are there?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so actually, I'd say that there was two things that for me made the SHAC campaign special, and neither of them were like fully unique, but I think the way we applied it definitely changed a lot of things and inspired a lot of people. You see, like, Palestine Action, CAFT USA, like there's a lot of campaigns now, like within and outside our movement, that they've been heavily inspired by it. But yeah, the first part was secondary and even tertiary targeting, and essentially what that is understanding how a business works. Like if you understand how a business works, then you can work out how to close a business. And I think we probably had a better understanding of the City of London and of Hunting Life Science itself than most people in those industries did. And so the very simple explanation, I suppose, is if a company doesn't have stationery, if it doesn't have toilet paper, if it doesn't have printers or computers or internet or electricity or any of these things, you have no business. And so it's a lot easier to convince the company to stop selling pencil sharpeners to one client than it is to convince a company to close itself down. And so we went for the softer targets. We went for these secondary targets, and in some cases, even tertiary targets, which would be like one step removed again. So it might be, I mean, we had it with the MBR suppliers campaign, actually, the people supplying bedding to MBR acres. They're, an industry supplier. They're not going to budge, but they also supply stuff to Pets at Home. And so Pets at Home have no direct connection to MBR acres, but they are facilitating them staying open by helping give money to the company that supplies the bedding. And so that's a tertiary target. So you take it one step out again. And that worked with the MBR suppliers campaign, that pressure on Pets at Home made them drop their contact with the bedding supplier, which made them drop their contact with MBR acres. So I think it's the most effective way of running a campaign, to be honest. I think if you want to close somewhere down, if that's your intention, then you need to look at what it is that's keeping them open, and then just one by one remove those things that keep them open until it's physically impossible for them to operate. And and it can take time. It's not as simple as that, oh, they've got no toilet roll, they'll close. But if 10 companies have stopped supplying them toilet roll, the 11th company is going to charge a premium, which puts their costs higher. And then if at the same time you're attacking their share price, if you're impacting their customer base, then they've got less money coming in, more money going out. And then on that level, again, it becomes unsustainable. And so that was the first part. The other part, I think, that made the SHAC campaign really special and effective was that we understood that business isn't just, like an office block. It's not just the corporate logo. It's not even just the CEO. It's every company is made up of dozens, hundreds, thousands of individuals. And amongst those people are the people that are the problem. the people that have signed the contracts. Every single terrible thing that happens on this planet, there's someone somewhere that signed a bit of paper that allows that to happen. And so we would identify who those people were. Who are the managers? Who are the directors? Who are the CEOs? Who's the CFO? And we would take our protest directly to them. And, you know, that meant inside their offices, it meant outside their offices, it also meant outside their homes, at their golf clubs. And like I did a protest in some swimming pool once, at their golf clubs, literally anywhere we could be, just to remind these people that, you know, it's not a 9 to 5 for these animals, so it's not going to be a 9 to 5 for them. And I think those two things, that secondary targeting, that soft targeting, combined with that personal pressure, made us incredibly effective.
You talked about pets at home as well. I mean, that brings it into the high street. Do you think that's a thing that's worth pursuing?
Absolutely. I think any campaign you do, you want it on the high street. It's quite hard. I think it's something that's being struggled with, I think, with the MBR suppliers campaign, is that every time a high street target is identified, they pull out like immediately. So, which is a shame, really, because it's nice to have it on the high street. But yeah, I think if you can get your campaign onto the high street, you can have a huge impact, because, you know, that's where the public see you, that's where the press see you, that's where you start to have these conversations, that's where you embarrass them. A lot of these companies, and especially, you know, if we're talking about, you know, this is, you know, species is take, but if you're focusing on dogs in laboratories, for example, the public do not support that. Like 1% of the public maybe support that. The public do not support testing on dogs in laboratories. And so if you're going onto the high street, and, you know, the same with social media, but you know, high street's better, and you're saying this company kills dogs in the most horrific ways, they don't want that. No company wants that associated with their image. And you know, yeah, we can do this online and whatever, but if you're literally stood outside their offices, the public, their neighbors, their like clients, their peers are seeing you stood there saying this company is killing puppies, like they're gone. They're gone. So yeah, so it's so important, I think, to be on the high street. And that's how you shift the Overton window, that's how you shift the narrative, that's how you shift the public discourse, and the political discourse, which comes with that, is by being visible. And so yeah, high street targets are so important.
Is there any reason that you decided vivisection in particular, as opposed to any other branch of the animal rights movement? Was it just part of the time?
Yeah, see, I feel like I could try and justify it. Like I do feel, to me, like it is not in terms of scale. Like obviously animal agriculture is like, the scale is like unquantifiable almost. But in terms of the horror, I think it's the worst thing we do to any life on this planet, is what we do inside laboratories. Because the meat industry is horrific, the dairy industry, the egg industry, they're horrific, but the tiny consolation for those animals who have to endure so much is that their lives are quite short. Whereas often inside laboratories, you have, you know, particularly primates, but even other animals, kept alive for year after year after year, like just undergoing the worst violence that we can imagine from the worst horror film. Like, it is like, I couldn't begin to imagine what these animals are going through. And so much of it is just because I wonder what happens if I do this, or like, yeah, I wonder what happens if I try this. And to me, it's so depraved. Like, it's so depraved. There's no justification. There's no, like, you know, there's no justification for eating meat, but like, at least people can try. Do you know what I mean? Whereas with this, it's like, why are you doing this? There's no benefit. Like, it demonstrably doesn't help human health. Like, cancer rates are higher than they've ever been, and like, yeah, like death from all kinds of things that are higher than they've ever been. It's not helping people. And so much of it isn't even trying to. So much of it is to just get a new pesticide to the market, or just to see what happens if you deafen a guinea pig listening to Slayer, or just the maddest, most horrible shit. So that, I think that's how I would justify why I focus on vivisection. And that's probably a big part of it. I think there's a big species as part of it. I think, and this is something I actually advocate for. And you know, I think within our movement, I think it's important that we address this with ourselves, that, you know, we are fighting for total liberation, that no life is more important than any other life. But when we're trying to pitch a campaign to the public, if we want a mass movement, we need to appeal to people who aren't vegan. We need to appeal to the public. And to appeal to the public, you need to meet them where they are. And where the British public is that they're a nation of dog lovers. Where we are, like most people in the country have a dog, have lived with a dog, have at least known a dog, or even if it's on TV, like, whereas we don't have those relationships with other animals. And so for me, it makes so much sense to target our campaigns there, bring them into the NBR campaign, the NBR suppliers campaign, Camp Eagle, whatever it might be, bring them into that. And then we can start talking about vivisection as a wider issue. You know, this doesn't just happen to dogs, this happens to cats, this happens to rabbits, this happens to primates. But also these dogs are being factory farmed. So is it bad that we're factory farming dogs? So then is it also bad we're factory farming pigs and sheep and cows and chickens? So I think just to the public, I think that's a sensible thing. But also for me, you know, as a teenager, like I love dogs. And yeah, like I've been conditioned over before I was even born, like generationally conditioned to view dogs as man's best friend, to view dogs as companions, as loyal and devoted and trusting and friendly and all these things that we don't have conditioned about other animals. And yeah, so that works for me too. Like when I see a dog being punched in the face, it hits different. Like it does hit different. And so that was a big part. And I think, you know, seeing that footage of that dog being punched in the face inside Huntington Life Sciences, it's like, yeah, there's like a rage there that just burns so deep. But also, as you say, I think, to be honest, the honest actual reason probably that vivisection was so big for me is because I got involved in the animal rights movement in 1998, 1999, and that was what we were focused on. We focused on, you know, every fur and everything else, but a lot of those things when I first got involved, they were on the brink of ending anyway, whereas vivisection was the big thing within our lifetime. We thought we might be able to end. Animal agriculture felt like it was too big at that point, but vivisection, yeah. And so that's where the focus of our movement was, and so that's where my focus was. And I guess then I just spent so much of my life devoted to this fight that I know so much about it, and it's so ingrained into my DNA at this point that I think that's probably the real honest reason.
So do you think, man, I'll admit that I tend to think it myself, it's quite a soft target. I mean, you know, I know unfortunately with the SHAC campaign, because the government just got so entrenched and so behind it, but it's an easier target than animal agriculture or some of the others, because it's abhorrent to almost everybody that you ever speak to ever. And do you think that that's the case? And do you think that makes your quest easier, your conversations easier? I know for us, go on, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely think it's a relatively easy win. And I think for slightly different reasons than you say. And I think when you look at social struggles that are effective, the reason they're effective, and something that makes us unique as a movement, I think, is that most social struggles, you're able to kind of, like, winning them doesn't really affect too many people in a negative way. So, for example, ending the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, impacted a relatively small number of slave traders. But the general public weren't really affected by that happening. And with the right to marry in America, for example, that campaign, and also the right to marry here, but that campaign, winning it didn't affect the day-to-day life of anyone other than those who had won the right to marry. The civil rights movement, like all of these things, like the people who are effective is small, you know, a tiny number of business people generally are effective. You know, they're a very powerful lobby, but they're not the public. They don't represent the views of the public. And so it's easy to rally the people around it. The problem we have, I think, as a movement is that we often have this idea that to be involved in our movement, you have to be vegan. Like that's the baseline of being involved in our movement. And I think that's a dangerous baseline to have, to be honest, because what you're then saying, I mean, gatekeeping the movement like that, you're basically saying the only people that can be active for any animal freedom issue are vegans. And that's what, like 2, maybe 3% of the population. And they're not all going to be active. You're never going to have the whole pool of people being active. So you're looking at a percentage of 2% of the population. And that's never going to make a mass movement. To have a mass movement for animal freedom, we need a percentage of the animal lovers, the dog lovers, the flexitarians, the climate activists. A percentage of them is like what, like a percentage of 80, 90% of the public. And then you get a mass movement. And so I think it is an easy win, the vivisection thing, compared to animal agriculture, because actually the gateway to it is like, do you think it's okay to violently murder dogs for pesticide? Do you think it's okay to cut open a monkey or a sheep or whoever it might be for the latest farming innovation, or for whatever it might be? It's all detached from people. And obviously they try with the arguments, and I think these have become a lot more impotent over the years, like like it's your nan or a mouse kind of thing. And I think at this point, with the technology we have and where we are as a society, I think those tend to kind of fall on deaf ears a little bit now. So I think we have that detachment from people already. People, like, if we ban vivisection, the public aren't going to be affected. If you ban animal agriculture, most people in this country still consume animal products. And so most people in the country aren't going to be campaigning for an end to something that they're part of. If they get involved in campaigns against vivisection, against fur, against hunting, whatever it might be, and then we can start having those conversations with them. I was doing ALF actions like for 2 years before I became vegan. And luckily for me, and for the animals, the people around me, yeah, they talked to me and yeah, they educated me, but they weren't dicks about it. And they understood, at the time I lived with my mum, and I didn't do my cooking, I didn't do my shopping. I didn't feel like I could be vegan. And yeah, maybe it's a weak excuse, but fortunately, those people supported me on my journey to going vegan, rather than telling me it's like, you're vegan or you're out. And if they'd said that, then yeah, honestly, I'd probably have joined the climate change movement or something, and I wouldn't be here now. I'd be up a tree somewhere. So I think it's very important to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge the fact that these gateway campaigns are so important. Greyhound racing, hunting, fur, and vivisection are a great way to bring the public into our cause. And it doesn't matter if they're vegan yet. It doesn't matter. What matters is they're doing something and they're starting to take the blinkers off, because we have generations of conditioning that other animals exist to be literally goes back to the Old Testament. Like Genesis in the Old Testament is literally God created animals for us to oppress. They're also really racism and misogyny go back to that same part of the Bible. But this is millennia of conditioning that other animals exist for our benefit and no other purpose. And undoing that is a lot of work. And I think beyond that, even if you convince someone that this is wrong and they're part of something terrible, which is a horrible thing to admit of yourself, that you're part of like the worst genocide that's happened in the world history that will ever happen. But I think even harder than that often is to acknowledge that every single person you care about, every single person you respect and trust and love is part of this atrocity, as a part of the most abhorrent evil that is taking place on this planet. People just don't want to process that. So to process it always too much. What we need to do is find the chinks in people's armor, to find those issues where they can be like, you know what, actually, yeah, animal testing is bad, because I'm not affected if we end it. Like, I'm not, yeah, I only buy cruelty-free, blah, blah, blah. Get them in on that and let them start thinking about these issues, because they will. Most people do. When I was a teenager, that's what happened to me. You find out about this one issue, it's bad, and then it just starts rolling out, and then you're like, oh, shit. And then that's when you become vegan. And I think that's so important. So I think it is a winnable thing, because it's where the public are at.
I think it's that opportunity, as you were saying as well. It's the opportunity to rub shoulders with people who have a broader tapestry. You come in on that one particular issue because it's poignant to you, and then you meet people who will also point you in the direction of other atrocities for you to consider as well. Makes those things a lot easier. So in 2001, you broke into Interfauna and spent a couple of hours hanging out with some dogs there.
Yeah, I think it was 2002.
Oh,
I think I was
okay.
19. I think it was 2002. I lose track. It was a long time ago, and my memory is not what it once was. But no, I think it was 2002. And so yeah, so I think I was the last person to go into what is now MBR Acres before Animal Rising did in 2023, whenever it was they went in. So yeah, so I mean, breaking in, that's an elaborate way of putting it. I feel I was doing a protest. We're driven up from Bournemouth in our trusty blue minibus, which someone had painted a big ALF logo on the roof for some reason, which obviously was really helpful for blending in places and not having the police helicopter literally following us everywhere. And we were on our way. We were always late. That was our thing. We were always late. And it was a day of like mobile, like roving protests. So this is something we used to do with the SHAC campaign that was super fun. And I'd love to see more of this kind of coming back, where we'd literally just get in a car, we would drive to a protest, we'd be like at a facility, whatever, first thing in the morning as all the workers arriving, give them hell, jump back in the car, onto the next one, jump out, do a protest. And you know, there's different ways it went. This day, the idea was there's like 100 people in different vehicles. And it was supposed to be just like turn up, cause mayhem, jump back in the cars, get away before the police arrive, on to the next one. But we were running late, so we missed the first two demos. And we kind of called ahead and they were like, look, you're going to miss this demo. Just meet us at Harland into Fauna, which is now MBR Acres. So we were like, okay, we'll meet you there. And they were like, obviously stay out of sight. And we were like, yeah, obviously we'll stay out of sight. So we got there, we pulled up on the grass verge. There was a police car just around the corner. And obviously they spotted us in our big blue minibus right away and came over to see what was going on. So me and a couple of my friends got out and just we were like, you know, we might as well just have a little walk around and see what we can see. So I walked to the back of the facility and you could hear the dog. I mean, if you've been to MBR Acres, the sound hasn't changed. Like you could hear the dogs barking. And I would just sit at the fence and, you know, these kind of places are so overwhelming. Like I'm not a hugely spiritual or religious person, but there is such a toxic energy at these places. You can just taste the death in the air. It's horrible. It's horrible. And so I stood there at the fence and just kind of taking it in. And I was looking at these fences. My two friends walked off with two of the cops. I had one cop on my shoulder. And I was looking at these two fences. They were like two, I mean, if you've been to MBR, you know what the fences are like. And I was looking, I was like, I can climb that fence. Like, I know I can climb that fence. Like, you know, I've climbed many a barbed wire, razor wire fence. And I was looking at it, I was like, I can get over there. If this cop wasn't here, I could get over that fence. And why wouldn't I if I could? And so I stood there looking at it. And suddenly 100 people showed up at the front gate. And this cop gets a call in his radio. It's like, get to the front now. There's like, we need everyone at the front. And so he looked at me, he kind of eyed me up. Like I wasn't watching, but I could basically feel him like sussing up all 9 stone of me at the time. And looking at his radio, looking at me. And then he just sprinted around the corner. And the second he started sprinting, I started sprinting towards the fence. And I got up over the razor wire, second fence up over the razor wire, running through the compound. And I just assumed it was going to be full of security and like guard dogs and police and whatever else. You know, like there's a police helicopter directly above me. There's some great footage of me climbing the fence, but it was no one there. But like I didn't really have time to process. I just, you know, I didn't want to just get rugby tackled and dragged out. So I just sprinted. I saw a pile of pallets next to a low building. So I just jumped on the pallets, jumped onto the roof. And then I kind of stopped to kind of like assess the situation. Like, I've met a lot of police officers. They're not great at climbing things. So I was like, I've got at least a couple of minutes up here before something happens. So I stood on the roof and I looked around and yeah, the whole place was deserted. Like not a security guard, not a cop. And like all around the razor wire around the edge, I could literally see my friends just throwing themselves into the razor wire, like 100 people just trying to get to me. Like as soon as they saw me on the roof, like everything went, it was like water boiling. It was crazy. And there was like the helicopter literally hovering above me. I could see people taking their jackets off and like bundling them up to look like a dog in case I managed to get one out so everyone could run in different directions. And I could see all this happening. And I was like, what the fuck do I do now? Like, I've got no tools. I've got like, there's no fucking way out. Like, what do I do? So I sat there for a little bit, just kind of processing it all. And then I decided to go for a little walk along the roofs to see where they took me. And I walked along and I saw this little narrow gap between two rooftops. And down along the opposite side, it was like a corridor. Along the other side, it was just barred kennels. It was like, you know, when you see like an American cop like drama, and you've got the like drunk tank with the metal bars floor to ceiling. It was just like that. They're not there now. And so I jumped down into this corridor, and there was maybe at least 10 pens, I would say. In each one, there was maybe like 10 dogs. Just concrete floor at the back, just a little concrete bench. And then just like the smallest amount of scattering of sawdust on the floor that was doing nothing. There was like urine running under the bars. There was shit running under the bars, blood running under the bars. And all these dogs were just terrified to see a human being. You know, I had a mask on, which probably didn't help, but they were terrified to see a human being. Like whatever their experiences had been, they clearly weren't good. They were just terrified. They literally just ran to the back of their pens, hiding under these concrete benches, just huddled up, shaking. One of the dogs I could see further along, she was like trying to chew her way through the bars. She'd lost all of her teeth, just like blood running out of her mouth where she'd been trying to like neurotically chew her way out. But yeah, they all just ran from me as soon as they saw me, and I kind of like knelt down and crouched down. And just the smell of ammonia, the smell of shit. And yeah, it broke, like truly broke my, like fully broke. I felt my heart break. Like it was horrific. And I just had tears come out of my eyes. And then there's one dog, she just kind of, I don't know if she was younger or just naturally braver or what, but, or could just sense something about me, but she just kind of really cautiously came to the front of the bars next to where I was. And I put my hand through and just started kind of petting her and stroking her. And yeah, yeah. And so I was stayed with her for about an hour. And every now and then I'd leave and I was like, these gates were padlocked. I had, like I said, I had no bolt cutters. I had no way of getting them out. I was like trying to kick the padlocks off. I was trying to shake them, see if I could break them. There's like nothing I could do. And I just cried for like 2 hours. I didn't know I had that much moisture in my body. And then after 2 hours of being in there, the police arrived. I could hear them come in, and there was a gate at the end of this corridor. I heard them coming through the gate. So I just walked all the way to the far end of the corridor. So I was like, you know what? I've had to see this for 2 hours. Like the very least, if you're going to arrest me, at the very least, you're going to fucking see this too. And it's as I walked along, I heard a barking to my right, and I looked through a little breeze block in the wall, and there was like the shed was just full of dogs. And I was kind of, yeah, I'm kind of gutted I didn't clock them sooner, because I don't know if I could have kicked the door down and got some of them out, but I don't want to dwell on that too much. But yeah, I walked to the end of the corridor. And before I did that, actually, the dog that I've been playing with and connecting with, I heard the police coming, and I gave her one last kind of stroke, and I looked her in the eye, and I promised her like I wasn't going to stop until every last shithole like that is closed. And yeah, then I walked to the end. The police came in. They started arresting me, and literally I was like, look, just fucking look. This is what you're fucking protecting. And they didn't give a shit. They didn't give a shit. They dragged me out. I went limp. I made them drag me, so they had to walk as slowly as they could. And all the way, I was just like, fucking look at what you're protecting. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? What the fuck is wrong with you? And they didn't care. They kind of glanced and didn't care and dragged me out. As they dragged me out, one of my friends ran over to make sure I was okay. I was physically fine, and just chanting close down HLS as they dragged me out. I had a really good photo, but the police stole it. But yeah, my friend ran over, and the cops just ran up and punched him in the gut and arrested him too. And yeah, and that was that. A heartbreaking moment in my life, definitely a defining moment in my life, I think, where I was committed to this anyway. But yeah, I'm not breaking that promise.
Good. It's nice to hear. I can't imagine that you would. Having such a visceral experience, it'd be incredibly difficult to turn you back. So it was 2007 when everything came crashing in.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. It wasn't a great year. Yeah, so basically, the SHAC campaign, like as we said, like Lord Sainsbury's kind of stepped up in 2001. Just a little bit of background on Lord Sainsbury's. He's a fairly pivotal figure in all this. In 1997, Tony Blair got elected to power with New Labour, promising this new life for animals. David Sainsbury's, one of the heirs to the Sainsbury's fortune, he gave £2 million to Tony Blair as a donation. Sorry, that's disgusting. And then within a couple of months, he was given a seat in the House of Lords, completely by coincidence. Within a year, he was given the position of Science Minister, the most powerful person in the country for science. And by complete coincidence, he happened to have turned his millions into billions by investing in biotech. And shockingly enough, somehow the decisions he made as science minister increased his personal fortune by 300%. So yeah, fucking asshole. And he devoted himself to increasing his own wealth as much as possible and also removing any obstacles to that wealth. And unfortunately for us, we were an obstacle to his wealth, or at least that's how he perceived it. He made a lot of money from animal testing, GM research. So yeah, so he stepped in 2001, sorted out the banking for them. 2003, I think, we convinced their insurance company to pull out, Huntington Life Sciences Insurance Company. They cut all ties, and no insurance company in the world would touch them, which is kind of incredible when you think like every army is insured, every nuclear power station is insured. But Huntington Life Sciences couldn't get insurance, so Lord Sainsbury's stepped in, gave them insurance through the Department of Trade and Industry, another historical precedent. No other company has ever been insured by the British government. And what that meant is when American activists broke into their facility over there and liberated dogs from the Huntington facility in America, the British taxpayer picked up the insurance bill, which is kind of wild. And yeah, we just kind of kept going from strength to strength, and the government kept trying different things to stop us. They obviously, they were physically helping Huntington like that, but also they changed laws. They brought in new laws. They made it illegal to protest outside people's houses. They made it illegal to protest inside people's offices. You can still do these things. I feel I should put a caveat. You can still do both of those things, just not as easily as before. And they then brought out a law which made it a crime to interfere with the contractual relations of a animal research facility, which is still a law, but I'm pretty sure it's an unlawful law. I would like someone to challenge it. So if anyone fancies getting arrested for that, please do it and then challenge it. And then they started getting the company started getting injunctions against us, which basically companies can pay the High Court to protect them from harassment, which apparently includes peaceful protests. So these companies were able to get these conditions like you can only stand in the specific spot one day a fortnight with 6 people, no amplified noise, no graphic images on your posters, no costumes. Oh, and we're going to put a big black screen around that area so no one can see you, let alone hear you. And it really got to the point it was almost impossible to do an anti-vivisection protest in this country. And so we increasingly started going across to continental Europe and just protesting there because loads of Huntington's customers were German or French. So we would just go and protest them on their doorstep where there weren't these wacky laws and there weren't these stupid injunctions. And so, yeah, we weren't really, I mean, we were smart enough and dogged enough to not really be affected by the government, which obviously didn't make them very happy. And so in 2004, this is a big spoiler from my book, so if you don't want a spoiler, stop listening now. But 2004, a pension company or something provider in the city of London offered a £20 million reward for information or for the conviction of animal rights extremists. They never really made it clear if that was just a one-off payment or if it was like a pool of money for like a lot of things. But there's a £20 million bounty on our heads, basically. Higher than was on bin Laden's head at the time. And a guy called Adrian Radford, who was working for a private investigating company who was doing kind of passive intelligence gathering for the pharmaceutical industry on SHAC. He was obviously doing some research one day and he must have come across this offer and it clearly piqued his interest because he was a grifter. And he quit his job. And the next time he showed up was at one of our animal rights gatherings on its animal sanctuary down in Kent. Friend, if you've been there. And he turns up in this salmon pink shirt, these neatly pressed chinos, white shoes at this filthy animal sanctuary. And he turns up, perfectly coiffed hair. And he's just loudly exclaiming how ghastly this whole thing is. And like, oh, there's mud on my chinos. And like, as far from an undercover cop as we'd ever seen. And yeah, I guess there was like a kind of a breath of energy about how he was, like, you know, ridiculously flamboyantly camp. And yeah, he just got really involved in the campaign. And, you know, I'm sure in his words, he would say he infiltrated us. I'd say in our words, he knocked on the door and asked to help. And we were like, obviously, like, we're a lawful campaign, please fucking help. And he made himself super useful. And so that weekend, he literally just went around the gathering and, you know, using his background in the military and in by investigating stuff, he just identified every undercover cop inside the gathering and just physically threw them out. Every journalist, and he'd be like, "Oh, look, this one's got a police notebook, get him out." And it got to the point that the police actually went to his former employer and told him, like, get your fucking man under control. Like, he's fucking up all of our operations. And this guy was like, he's not my guy anymore. Like, he quit his job a couple of weeks ago. I don't know what the fuck he's doing. And so, yeah, he just went fully rogue and just, infiltrated us, and he made himself super useful. He did a whole bunch of really good actions, to be fair. Like, he stormed the Japanese embassy. He helped plan an invasion of Heathrow Airport. He came up with this idea that, it was a genuinely good, again, credit where it's due. He, and using police money, which I guess is kind of funny, he would hire out hotel rooms inside conference centers. So when these pharmaceutical industries, when Hunter Life Sciences were displaying at a conference or presenting at a conference, he would hire rooms within the hotel. So when the police showed up in the morning to like blockade, like secure the premises, they were locking protesters inside the conference, which is brilliant. And it's brilliant that the police paid for that. And yeah, and then obviously the problem really came for him more than us initially, in that he had promised the police clearly he was going to, infiltrate the Animal Liberation Front. And, there was a lot, like a crazy amount of ALF actions happening, satellite to the SHAC campaigns. The SHAC campaign was a lawful campaign, but other people, the Animal Liberation Front, Militant Forces Against HLS, various other groups, individuals, organizations decided, their own way of doing things. And all power to them for doing it. But that's what he had promised he was going to put a stop to. And that wasn't the SHAC campaign. So rather than trying to infiltrate something he clearly had no knowledge of or capacity to infiltrate, he, a lot of these organizations, it's just individuals going out doing stuff, or close family members working together, or friendship groups or whatever. So infiltrating is hard. And the police never really managed to do it at this period anyway. And so rather than putting any real effort in, he just found two new activists, convinced them to go and raid a chicken farm with him. And in a, what everyone described as a bungled operation, they managed to get 9 chickens out of this chicken farm. And then it's not really clear what happens over the next few months, but a few months later, him and his 2 new friends did an action. In one night, they wrote off 14 cars belonging to people connected to the import and export of laboratory animals in one night, 14 vehicles. Various houses outside their houses. And that's more than any Animal Liberation Front activist was convicted of damaging in that, during the entirety of the SHAC campaign. So they went from, this bungling chicken thing to a very proficient, unit, ALF cell in a matter of months. So clearly there was they must have been active for the duration of those months. They're kind of building up the confidence, building up the knowledge. And he's publicly admitted that he helped research the targets. He paid for the equipment. He was the getaway driver. And that the police actually picked the targets that they went to. And one of them was a lady whose name I've just forgotten, which is not like me, but she was the CEO of the company that ran Heathrow Airport. And he says that the police picked her address themselves to make it political, because in his words, when things get political, people start to get rounded up. And then at some point after that, he suddenly announced that he was dying of some terminal illness. He left the movement to heal, to recover, or to spend his last days with his partner, whatever he was doing. And then, on May the 1st, 2007, 700 police officers smashed down my door, smashed down 32 other people's doors, dragged us out of our beds at, I think, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, took us to police stations across the UK. There was a few arrests as well in the Netherlands and in Belgium, and held us for the next, I think, like 30 something hours. And it's interesting, I think. We only found out quite recently. We saw a video of the police had already called a press conference before they arrested us. And at this press conference, which happened while we were in police custody, they're talking about, how we're being interviewed about arson attacks, about bombings, about all these wild actions. In reality, we were sat there in these police cells over hours and hours and hours of police interviews, clearly designed to kind of try and psychologically break us or whatever, but hours of interviews being asked, is this your signature on this application for a street collection permit? Or is this picture of you, is this you holding this banner on this protest? Or is this your voice making this phone call to the police asking to arrange a protest? Just like the maddest stuff, like nothing. Like I don't think I was asked about a single bombing. It might have livened up the interview a bit, but I might have gone from silent to slightly more silent. But yeah, there's nothing like that. This was not, and this never was about stopping crime. This was about shutting us the fuck up. That's what this was. They wanted to silence the movement. They want to terrify the movement. And it's worth saying as well, like in the run up to this, we weren't the first people taken out. Like we were, and it's, that old kind of adage, first they came for the communists, but like that's kind of what happened with us. And we were blasé about it. I think like first they came for SHAC USA. If you've seen the Animal People documentary, that kind of covers that period. And yeah, like the FBI raided our friends over there at gunpoint, arrested them. They ended up getting, up to 4 years in prison for running their campaign. But, we were kind of looking at it and we were like, well, they're like these kind of college-age kids that are like running this website and they're like, they have their First Amendment right to free speech and like, they absolutely pushed the envelope on that. They were like, they'd have adverts for bricks on the back of their newsletters, like have a smashing time. And like they would sell, or they would give out match pack boxes with Huntington's address in. And, they were definitely pushing their First Amendment. And not to the point that it got, in hindsight and, actually looking into their case, it's like, well, no, like they were absolutely fucked over by their government. But at the time we were like, yeah, we did kind of tell them to tone it down a bit. And that, yeah, I guess this is what happens. So we carried on, we had disclaimers all over our newsletters, our websites. So Keir Starmer was one of the barristers that used to check our website and newsletter. And we, by this point, most of our protests were arranged with the police. We had a parameters of protest document we gave to everyone who attended, like, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. And so we were like, we're fine. We've got all our bases covered. We're a lawful campaign. And then they came for the New Church Guinea Pig camp. No, actually, no, sorry. Then they went for the SHAC Canada campaign. And again, we didn't even know that had happened, I don't think, until I was researching my book. I don't think I really fully understood what happened over there. But basically, the FBI that shut down SHAC USA went to Canada and helped shut down SHAC Canada. They managed to avoid prison sentences there, though, by making like a deal that they'd stop protesting. And then those same FBI officers came to the UK and shut down or helped the British police shut down the campaign against New Church Guinea Pig Farm. And again, we were kind of, we were so focused on what we were doing, we didn't really have time to kind of get too involved in what was happening like out here. And, that campaign was very direct action heavy. There was like, like some pretty wacky actions happening up there. So we were like, well, they've obviously got caught for some actions they did or accused of doing. Like, and, one of them in particular, those who are around the time will remember it, was pretty, like controversial. And it's like, you kind of, if people are doing that, this is what happens, I guess. And then they went for the Sequani campaign. And at the time, we didn't really, because we were so focused on the SHAC stuff, they were friends of ours, but we didn't really know much about what they were doing. We didn't really know. It was, on the other end of the country, we didn't really know what they were up to. Turns out they weren't up to anything. They literally just had a website and they posted like protest reports and, like protest targets. And I think in the whole campaign, there was like one window got broken because a security guard threw someone into it. And there was no direct action, but we didn't realize that at the time. We were like, well, there must be stuff happening we're not aware of that's not being reported or whatever. But no, like they just went for them in training to come to us, I think. And so what Sean Kirtley ended up getting, I think he got 4 years for running this website that was demonstrably lawful. He managed to get it overthrown, but after he had spent 16 months in prison.
Mm.
And then they came for us. And they didn't end with us. They then went on to the Speak campaign with Mel Broughton. Then they went off to Austria and tried to, and that's kind of where it all kind of went untangled a bit for them. But yes, they came for us and yeah, kind of did everything they could to throw the book at us and basically came up with this elaborate conspiracy theory.
Blackmail.
Blackmail, yeah, conspiracy to blackmail was the charge. And in British law, a blackmail is making an unwarranted demand with a menace. And the unwarranted demand was stop dealing with Huntington Life Sciences. The menace was, or else we'll put you on our website and then other people might do naughty things to you. And in the whole campaign, in all the evidence, that I've been through, I've got boxes and boxes of it. There's only one time anyone makes that threat. And it's not even really a threat, but there's only one time that threat is explicitly made, and it's by Adrian Radford, this police informant. Professional is very unusual because obviously he got taken on by the police and was working with them, but like it's a very unusual situation to have an informant that acts like an undercover cop, because like, he wasn't turned. He wasn't one of us that got turned or bribed or threatened. Like he came in to professionally infiltrate. It's a very weird situation, but he's the only person recorded as having made this threat. But the threat was attributed to Greg Avery, one of the founders of SHAC. And at this point, and I haven't spoken to Greg since this all went down, so I don't want to put words into his mouth. I don't want to second guess anything. But what we do know is at the point that Greg Avery pleaded guilty, having been presented with this phone call that was attributed to him, he believed Adrian Radford was a close friend dying of a terminal illness. So they pleaded guilty. Greg pleaded guilty. His partner pleaded guilty, Natasha. And as a result, they did it to try and protect everyone else, to try and take, act like a lightning rod. What they actually did, unfortunately, without realizing it, without any of it, was they admitted that this conspiracy was real. By pleading guilty, they were admitting there had been a conspiracy and they were helping organize it, which then meant for all the rest of us, we just had to be neatly tucked anywhere into it. We didn't have to do anything criminal. We just had to be aware this conspiracy existed. And now they've proven there's a conspiracy. We can just be tucked anywhere into that, wherever it's. So, like going to a barbecue at our friend's house became a 3-monthly planning review meeting of the Animal Liberation Front. Going to the garden shed to get some placards becomes a sinister thing. Like, what do you do? Why do you go to the garden shed so often? Collecting firewood while it's still light. It's like, why would you collect firewood while it's still light? Like, just crazy stuff that doesn't mean anything, but when you paint this big conspiracy around it, it's very hard to pull yourself out of it, really. And so yeah, we ended up getting sucked into the quagmire of this conspiracy. And I think most of us, some people were clearly guilty of specific acts of direct action, but most of us, I think, would still argue fairly strongly and vocally that there was no conspiracy, and certainly we weren't part of a conspiracy. We were just campaigning to close down an animal testing laboratory using whatever means seemed appropriate at the time, and for the most part lawfully. So yeah, so that's where we ended up. And then I got a 5-year sentence, and my friends got various. It went up and down for their ones. Heather got 11 years, Frank Tasha 9 years, a couple of people got 8 years. So yeah, it was pretty wild.
I'm just going to remind everybody, if you've got questions to ask Tom, then you need to put those in the chat. I'm just going to ask one last question before we move into that. So I know I've heard you talk about spending 2.5 years on license when you came out. And you've said that that's objectively far worse than being inside in itself. Can you explain why you feel that?
Okay, I mean, I would say it's subjectively worse, but for me it was worse. And I think a big part, there's a few reasons it sucked, to be honest. So prison. So the time before prison is just, it's 3.5 years we had on bail, and the last year I was put on electronic tag for a whole other mad story. But that's just 3.5 years where you can't start planning a future, because you don't know, you know you're going to go to court, and then you might go to prison, and like, what's that going to be? And after the first, we were in the second wave of trials, so we'd seen people get 9, 11 years, and so we were, we and our lawyers were saying, like, maybe I'm looking at like a 7-year sentence. And so how you can't plan a future knowing that you might be going to prison for 7 years. So that kind of sucks. And then you go to prison, you get your sentence, and suddenly you have a release day and you have the end of your license. You have a day where you can start looking forward to. And then you go in prison, and in prison, like, obviously terrible things can happen in prison, but terrible things can happen anywhere. But really, like, I don't know if I've ever felt as fully safe as I did in prison, because my experience, and this is my experience, but my experience was most people in there just wanted to go home. So as long as I didn't get involved in gambling or drugs or anything silly like that, as long as I just got on and did my time, nothing bad felt like it was going to happen to me beyond where I was. Like, it's not getting worse than being in prison. That's it. That's just like, it. And if I can make a life in here, then great. Like there's no what you're gonna do to me? Like what you're gonna do? Like you've done it. So that was actually okay, and I was able to make a life in prison. I was able to find moments of significant happiness in prison. Really, I got a job gardening. I got to a point where I was able to be unsupervised gardening inside the prison. I had there was like a particular garden that I was the only person allowed to tend. So I was able just to go and sunbathe under palm trees and watch like peregrine falcon chicks fledging off of the old police station next door. And we had a really fun five-a-side football tournament that ended up in bloodshed, but in a very fun way. And it was like I had great. Yeah, I had little like side hustles going on. It was I enjoyed myself a lot of the time. And then when I came out, I spent 2 years in prison looking forward to being released. 2 years planning my release day, like all the things like me and my partner were going to do. And I was excited for 2 years, pinned on this date. And then 2 weeks before I got out, I was told I wouldn't be allowed to talk to my partner on release. I wouldn't be allowed to talk to my brother on release because he was a previous animal rights prisoner as well. I wouldn't be able to talk to any of my friends. I don't think it was like any vegans or activists I wasn't allowed to talk to. I couldn't do any activism. Obviously, I knew that was coming. I couldn't use the internet, and I was being put in a bail hostel, which is where they put sex offenders. And there was no justification for that. Like, I had plenty of addresses. I could go to my parents' house. But because my parents had written and visited me in prison, my probation said, "Oh, they support you, and therefore they support animal rights." It's like they support their fucking son. They do not fucking support my activism. They support me as a human being, and that's fucking sketchy as shit. So yeah, they put me in this bail hostel, and I was told I'd be in there for no one's in there for more than 3 months, 3 or 4 months maximum. I ended up being in the bail hostel for 7 months, and they were right. No one else was in for more than that. The fucking sketchiest sex offenders were coming and going. And I just had to sit there. And the only reason I got out of the bail hostel was because me and the bail hostel conspired against my probation officer to come up with a plan where they basically had to kick me out. And without them helping me with that, I would have probably been in for the whole 2.5 years of my license. So I ended up being there for 7 months, and that fucking sucked. It was obviously curfew, and I had to sign in multiple times a day. Couldn't get a job. I couldn't use the internet. I couldn't do all kinds of things. Although I did hack the TV to be able to use the internet, but don't tell them that. But so that kind of stuff. But I think the main reason it really sucked was because when you're on license, you have to adhere to your license conditions. And obviously mine were incredibly strict. And if you break your license conditions, the police just come and arrest you. Or even if they think you might have broken your license conditions, they come and arrest you, they take you back to prison, and then you get to appeal. And while I was in prison, this has actually happened to my former partner, Nikki. Like she was just, she was released. She was staying at her mum's house, which was what was agreed. She was just doing some baking for her friends' work parties, making some vegan cupcakes. She gets a knock at the door. The police are there, and they just take her back to prison. And she then ends up being in prison for several months because a police officer, who it turns out doesn't exist, contacted her probation officer, claiming that she was living at her dad's house rather than her mum's house, which is a lie. So they sent a local police officer to check. He came, he spoke to Nikki, he confirmed she was living there. He wrote a report, and he's confirmed this to Nikki. He wrote a report saying like, nothing's wrong, she's staying there. And then at some point, someone changed his report to say that she wasn't there. And so she got recalled to prison on this because the police weren't happy with her sentence. And so then, she ended up spending a few months in prison, which is harder for her than the original sentence, because the original sentence, it was like a kind of relief. It's like, this is it. I get this done. I get out. But then it's like suddenly being dragged back into it for like no reason and not knowing what's going on. Like it was way more unsettling and a much harder experience for her. So she ended up spending a few months back in prison. By 2.5 years of waiting for that tap on the shoulder, dragged back to prison. And then I spent another 2 years, a year and a half in prison, like having to try and fight it. And it was actually like, and I preempted how bad it'd be. Like before I was released from prison, I was seriously debating whether just to refuse. In fact, I asked my solicitor, can I just refuse to be released? Can I just do the next 2.5 years in prison so I don't have to wait to fucking get dragged back here? And they told me that was a terrible idea, but I don't know. I don't know if it was a terrible idea, but yeah.
Sorry, just going to get my mic back on then. Well, it's a phenomenal story, and and I'll plug your book for you. Do read Tom's book, Your Neighbour Kills Puppies, because it is phenomenal, and it reminded me of a lot of stuff that I'd completely forgotten about over the years and the grey matter and all the rest of it. I'm going to turn you over to Amy now, and Amy's going to run through the chat of the questions that are in there waiting for you to answer. So thank you very much for the story that you've told so far, and I'll hand you over to Amy, and Amy will walk you through some more questions, and I'll speak to you again at the end, Tom. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Hey, Tom.
Hello.
So there's only a few questions, actually. And given Alan's just been plugging your book, I'm going to start with the last one, which was, what's the best place to buy it? And don't say Amazon.
No, I try not to. So it depends where you are. Like Freedom Bookshop have it. A lot of kind of radical bookshops have it. Otherwise, if you want to buy it online, Pluto Press is the publishers. They sell it directly. You can get it online from Waterstones. Hive is a good place to get it online because they give a share of the profits to local bookshops. So yeah, I'd say Hive or Pluto Press or a radical bookshop. Or if you find it in a shop, then get it from the shop.
Cool. Thank you very much. I'm actually going to do them backwards, I think. So Fee said, in response when you're talking about your arrest in 2007, surely that was unlawful.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and we're trying to appeal our convictions, but it's unfortunately the British legal system is not set up for people appealing their convictions, and in order to appeal you need new evidence, and that doesn't mean that you've uncovered something new in the evidence that's supplied at the time. You have to find something actually new, and that's very hard to do. And we do have some new evidence. We have some audio recordings of Adrian Radford making the blackmail threat that was used to convict us. But we're currently in the undercover policing inquiry as named victims, and we've been advised that it's best to wait until the end of that inquiry to see if anything else comes out and kind of put it together and try and appeal then. But no, it's very hard to appeal, and you see it in cases like Lucy Letby, the nurse that's been accused of killing those babies. Like there's literally international experts have written a whole report proving that not a single baby was murdered, but she can't appeal because the evidence they've relied on was available at the time of the conviction. So our legal system in many, well, it needs tearing down, to be honest, doesn't it? But it definitely is changing in order to allow people to prove their innocence. But yeah, the police don't care about unlawful false arrest. This was a conspiracy to shut us up, and it worked. Well, it didn't work, but it got rid of the campaign.
Let's unmute. Yeah, thank you. So this one is from Pam. So Pam says, what's the best way to apply pressure to MBR shareholders?
So I think the best way to apply pressure to any company is, well, MBR don't have shareholders, so that answers that quite easily. MBR are a private company, they don't have shareholders. Actually, that's the situation we forced Hunting Life Sciences to just before they closed. I don't know if MBR have any specific aspirations to be a listed company. They haven't done it yet, so there are no shareholders, but there are suppliers, and there is the MBR suppliers Facebook group. I'd strongly advise everyone join that and do the action alerts and stuff that pop up in there, but also have a look through. If you go onto the MBR suppliers group, Facebook doesn't make these things easy, but at the top there is a tab and it will either say announcements or features, I think. And if you click on that, you get a list of pinned posts, and one of them is a list of every known supplier, and another is a list of all of their offices, county by county. So I would go onto the MBR suppliers group, find those pinned posts, and just see what is in your area and go and do a protest. And I think we often have this idea that to do a protest, we need like dozens of people or like a huge turnout. But some of the best protests I've done, genuinely, some of the best protests I've done in my life have been me and one other person. Like you can do so much with a small amount of people. And yeah, like sure, I get not everyone wants to like run into buildings and be obnoxious, but even standing outside, just it's all pressure. And Alan was mentioning about Stericycle earlier, the clinical waste provider, and the protests we've been doing down here in Bournemouth, combined with what's happening in Liverpool and other places. But we've been so effective down here that now if anyone shows up at any Stericycle facility to do a protest, they lock the whole site down. So literally you can just turn up on your own with a homemade Stericycle placard, like steal an estate agent sign and paint the back of it, whatever, a bit of cardboard, and go and stand outside Stericycle on your own with a friend, with a couple of people, and you can shut the whole facility down, which is pretty empowering and so important, and puts so much pressure on them. So yeah, have a look and just start protesting. And yeah, I think we all need to get out of the mindset, A, that we need lots of people, and B, that we need things to be organized for us. Like, we have so much power if we want it. Like, we can just step into our power. We can get leaflets printed, we can get stickers printed. They don't have to be good. Like, they just need to get the message across, and we can go and we can hold protests, and we can do stickering, fly posting, and all of these things that add so much pressure. And when it might feel like it's just you going out and doing the stickering, doing this protest, but when that's happening across the country, that's, it's a tsunami of action, and that's what we need, is a tsunami of action. And for that, we need every single one of us taking that action.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cool. Thank you. And Pam goes on to say, how did you find out who their insurers are?
Good question. It used to be easier until we came along and ruined it for everyone. So some companies, so I think I did find Charles Rivers insurers because they have public liability insurance. Employers liability insurance, which was publicly listed for some reason on some website I found once. But MBR are a little bit smarter apparently than Charles River and haven't published that information. So at this point we don't know, but hopefully that information will come to light at some point. But even if not, there's so many suppliers we can be knocking on.
Yeah, totally. Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, Jackie says, has it made you more fearful to protest nowadays?
Not really. I think that was very blasé, wasn't it? No, I think there was. So, we're a long way out of this. And I think writing my book was very cathartic for me in terms of, I feel like we all kind of gaslit ourselves a bit. Like when it happened, we were like, this was inevitable. And everyone was telling us it was inevitable. And actually, when I wrote my book, I was like, well, no, none of this was inevitable. We were just really fucking unlucky that Lord Sainsbury's existed. We were really unlucky that the pharmaceutical industry were already having closed door meetings with the government, trying to blackmail the government into making the UK more desirable for them. And so when we came along, it was very easy just to switch those conversations to us. We were very unfortunate that Agent Radford existed. Like, it was, it was just unfortunate on a number of things. So that's not going to happen again. And also the reason it happened was because we were so effective. And not just that we were effective in closing that, what we were doing to close down 100 Life Sciences, but what we were doing was so effective that the FBI were having meetings with the American government about stopping this type of activism. Full stop, not the SHAC campaign, but all of it. And taking out SHAC wasn't just about taking out SHAC. This was about stopping this method, the SHAC model of activism. And, it was inspiring anti-logging groups, environmental groups, it was human rights organizations taking this up. And it was working. Like, it's a really solid campaigning model. And so, yeah, we were taken out because we were being so effective. And sadly, at this moment, the animal rights movement isn't that effective. Like, we're having, small successes. There's a lot of great things happening, but we're not, there's no politicians losing sleep over us at the minute. There's no billionaires crying themselves to sleep in a bathtub full of money anymore. Like, and until we get back to that point, we're not gonna face the same oppression. Like, Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion are going to get it. Palestine Action are definitely going to get it. But until we get back to that, we're just not. So from that level, no. But also, I think the psychological damage I think it did to me really was that when I got out of prison, Lord Sainsbury's, he said in a secret meeting that was supposed to be redacted, and I've read all the minutes from, but he said to the industry that he was going to eliminate the animal rights movement or the anti-vivisection movement by the end of 2006. Now, he's a little bit behind his schedule, but that was his aim, to eliminate the movement. And most of the focus of the movement at the time was on vivisection. So in eliminating the movement, he eliminated the movement. So when I came out of prison, there wasn't really anything to join. And a lot, I know a lot of people that have been to prison for various things. I spent a couple of weeks in prison long before this, for the same campaign, but something else. And every time someone I know has been to prison, firstly, there's been a cool action that's happened that's like warranted them going to prison, whether they did it or not, something cool has happened. And then they get out of prison, and then they can either just jump straight back in where they left off, or they can kind of find a safer bit of the movement to kind of get their confidence back and kind of build back up through it. For us, we got out of prison. There hadn't been this one cool action. It was just this kind of, oh, we went to a barbecue. I went on some lawful protest in France. I did these things that weren't really a crime, and now I get a 5-year prison sentence for it. And also, yeah, there's just no movement to join. So the only way I could really be active was really to start a new campaign, which, I was under heavy police surveillance, and that would have lasted all of a week probably before I got carted off to prison again on license. Or, trying to find these safe places in the movement. But we were literally sent to prison for doing outreach tours, for doing leafleting, for doing protests arranged with the fucking police. So there was no safe place in the movement for us to kind of drop back into, or that's how it felt, even if there had been a movement. So yes, there's a long time I didn't really know what to do with myself, and I felt quite lost in it all. But
Can we use this one?
But no, like now I'm fine. I did like a fur shop invasion in Paris a couple of days ago, and that was super fun. And I'm still climbing on top of things and dropping banners and doing much of what I've always done. So no, and certainly in the long term, it hasn't really put me off. I always feel like the least I can do is try and inspire people to take action. And if you want to inspire people to do something, you have to lead from the front, don't you? So I would never expect anyone to do anything that I'm not doing. And so by extension, I just keep doing what I've always been doing.
Very cool. Thank you. And thank you for doing that. I've got one final question at the moment, and that is from Jess, who says, any tips to help belligerent vegan activists accept non-vegan activists?
I think it's a hard one, because I think when we first get active, and certainly when we first become vegan, I feel like there is this kind of like righteous fury to us, and understandably, but it's not helpful, but it's also very hard to convince people that are in that mindset to kind of tone it down a bit. But I think the main thing is just to remember our own stories, like where did we come from? And certainly for me, and this won't be true for everyone, but I didn't wake up one day with a balaclava on and bolt cutters in my hands. Like there was a process to me becoming active and then becoming vegan. And if people had, truly gatekeep the movement for me and told me I couldn't be active if I wasn't vegan, then I wouldn't have been active. And like I said, I wouldn't be here now. And all the things I've done and contributed to this movement and to the animals wouldn't have happened. And so I think that's very important, and I think it's a conversation we should have, an ongoing conversation when we meet new vegans, when we meet new activists, to have these conversations like, where did you come from? What's your story? How did you get into this? And it's useful for us to know that, because then we have, data that we can use of how do we make more people follow that same path. But also it does mean that if you know someone's story into the movement, then you can kind of check them a bit if they start being hypocritical to new people. And also, but I think a very very wise person once said to me, Heather from SHAC, she once told me that when we first find out about these atrocities, and whether it's like animal injustices or humans or the environment, whatever it is, when we first find out about these horrible things that happen, we get really sad. That's the first reaction you have, is just tears and just horror and heartbreak. And that's where that's the first step. And most people at that point, most of the public that see these terrible things, they get very sad, but then they move on with their life. The people who become activists, that sadness turns to anger. And that's what drives our activism. Those tears of fire are what drive our activism. And that's where most activists say, and that's where you find people like, being intolerant to people that want to help but aren't, doing it the right way or whatever. But the truly effective activists are the people that are able to find a way, and it's not easy, and a lot of people I don't think are capable of it, to be honest, but find a way of compartmentalizing that rage and that anger and those tears and that grief, to find a way of putting that in a little box, holding on to it because you need it to drive your activism, but then be able to detach yourself from that enough to be strategic and to think, well, actually what's helpful, what is going to have the biggest impact for animal rights, for the animals, for the movement, for each other, for what we're doing. And if you can get to that point, then you will be effective. And that's when we start closing down companies. That's when we start changing laws. That's when we start bringing the public behind us, when we can be truly strategic and not just fully motivated by grief and anger.
That's a very cool answer. Thank you for that. Very inspiring. You'll notice I'm now in two places.
Terrifying.
It's just the thing that I do. Cool. Right. I can't see the chat anymore. I think that might be all of your questions.
I think that is all the questions. Any last questions from anyone? Oh,
One more message. How to use this? Truly inspirational. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Alan, who's here, but thank you so much, Tom. That was amazing.
Hello. Hooray, the wonders of the joys of technology. Well, I think that brings us about to conclusion. Is there anything in particular that you'd want to add with regard to FEAT and how that can move forward, or how well you think it's doing, or anything along those lines?
I mean, it's great that it's happening, and full credit to you and everyone that's supporting it for doing it, because it's certainly what we need. And I think we're at a point in our movement where we need to rebuild the proper community-based organizing grassroots of our movement, and we need to create a culture where people feel empowered to act. And I think that is something that's been lost. There's incredible work happening across the movement. There's, like great things happening, but we do have a problem where most of the organizing now is very central. It's very turn up at a certain time in a certain place, in a certain thing. And we really need to reclaim that power that we all have, to step into our power, to be like, we'll have a local animal rights group meeting. We'll go, we'll share, we'll talk ideas, we'll strategize, we'll plan, and we'll socialize. And then afterwards, on my way home, I'll put up some stickers, I'll do some fly posting, I'll do some chalking, or whatever. And people, not everyone wants to do that, not everyone can do that, but we can all do something. We can research, we can fundraise, we can paint signs, we can do protests, we can do phone blockades, there's so many things we can do. And it's really important, I think, that we start stepping into that. And that's what I think is wonderful about what you're doing, is encouraging people to experiment and try things. And it's okay to experiment. It's okay to fail. It's okay to have a go at something and it not work. That's fine. It's better to do something than nothing. Whatever you're doing is essential. Even if it doesn't work in that moment, you might give someone else an idea, or you don't know what your actions, what the ripple on effect of it's going to be. So it's so important that we learn to act. It's so important that we reclaim that culture of just doing something, and all of us just doing something and not waiting for someone else to do it. We used to have a thing, with the Animal Liberation Front. We used to do all these things to try and explain to people, this is you, the person behind the mask is you. And that's true for the whole movement. If you're waiting for someone to climb over the fence at NBR, you're going to be waiting forever if it's not you. These things don't just happen. There is no superheroes swinging in to save the day. We are the fucking superheroes. We need to swing in to save the day. And when we go somewhere like NBR Acres, all that's standing between the dogs and us, it's not the police, it's not the fences, it's not the cameras, it's just our own fucking courage. That's it. That's all that's standing between us and those dogs. And it's just up to us whether we have that courage or not. And that applies across the board. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? It might be cliched, but it's true. The animals fucking need us. They need us, and they need us to do whatever the fuck we can.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I often say to myself, the only thing that authority has over us is fear. Once they've lost that, they've lost entirely. Well, that brings us to the end of the evening. It's been a fantastic conversation. It's been lovely to hear you talk about your experiences and your feelings on the movement as it stands now. Well, I think we'll end it there then. Thank you ever so much for everybody that's come and attended. I hope that you've learned some things and at least exchange some interesting and relevant information, which is what these things are all about, and it's what keeps the movement moving, and it kind of keeps us on our toes. The more conversations we have, and the more we exchange information with each other, and as Tom says, just try anything. If it works, it works, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it doesn't mean it's not worth trying in the first place. So on that note, thank you very, very much, Tom. It's been a wonderful evening. And I really look forward to seeing you again in person and talking to you soon.
Imminently, I'm sure.
I'm quite sure it will be. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody else who came. And we will see you again. Enjoy.
Ciao.